And that is Iran's ambassador to South Africa, Mansour Shakib Mer. They're briefing the media about the developments back home, and also starting off by paying tribute to the late leader of the country, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, saying that he was not only a devoted figure, but also a lead scholar, one he describes as skilled, a skilled statesman, one who institutionalized the revolution. Also speaking about what is currently taking place in the region, saying that what is happening is not only an attack on Iran, but an attack on, in fact, the region as a whole. So let's get reaction to this particular story as we continue then to look at the different developments as far as this story is concerned. Dr. Kingsley Makhubela, international relations expert and former ambassador, joins us live now. A very good evening to you, Doc, and thank you so much for your time. So the Iranian ambassador to South Africa says that he's calling on the non-aligned parties to, like BRICS, for example, to condemn what is currently taking place, and also saying that when it comes to what is currently taking place, the war that is, it's not only an attack on Iran, he's describing it as an attack on the region.
Good evening, Bongiwe. Unfortunately, organizations such as BRICS are really paralyzed. If BRICS is to take a center stage, this is one of the most crucial geopolitical challenge that has ever been faced by the world. You would have expected a voice of BRICS, but you're unlikely to see that given different parties that are involved in BRICS. You have Iran in BRICS, you have the UAE, and Iran has attacked some targets in the UAE. So you're unlikely to get a cohesive statement. Similarly, the United Nations is unlikely to do that, as you have seen the Security Council, and no firm decision that has been taken, but that's the nature of the contemporary multilateral institution. It's general paralysis.
And given what you're saying then about the neighbors, he says, we're not attacking our neighbors, but our base is going as far as saying that what is a U.S. jet doing in Kuwait airspace? Is this likely to augur well with the neighbors, or is it something that the neighbors are simply still not going to accept?
Well, neighbors want to accept what's going on, but Iran has made it quite clear, Bondiwe, from really just before the war, that any attack that emanates from any of the Gulf states, it would regard that as a hostile act, and it would act against the American interests in neighboring countries. So there's nothing new in this. But Iran is playing on this issue again, Bongiwe, because it raises a serious challenge within the Islamic faith, what's called Ummah, the solidarity of Muslim countries, that they allow the Israelis and the Americans to use their countries to attack Iran. But it raises a vice versa problem again for Iran to attack a fellow Muslim state. But in terms of certain thinkings within the Islamic faith, what they see going on, and this is how the Iranians would interpret this, as apostate in terms of the behavior of neighboring countries, and they would interpret that as having the right to retaliate and attack these countries. It keeps on really compounding this challenge.
And speaking about compounding, what is also compounding is the briefings in the U.S. Just a few hours ago, there was one in the Pentagon with the Secretary of Defense. Yesterday, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, was briefing U.S. President Donald Trump, saying that he may have forced Israel's hand, and that it was his opinion that Iran was going to launch a military strike first. But the Secretary of State saying that it's false, telling reporters it's false to suggest that he had said that the U.S. launched the war because Israel was going to strike Iran. And you're listening to a lot of different messaging as well in these particular briefings. How does that begin to compound the developments as well?
Bongiwe, I listened to Marco Rubio's briefing after the meeting with the Gang of Eight yesterday. And he made it quite clear that they reacted to this because Israel was going to attack Iran and the Iranians would attack them. But there's been confusion. On Saturday, the Pentagon was briefing staffers at the Capitol Hill, And they explained that there was no intelligence that suggested that Iran was going to attack the United States. And that really created a big problem for Marco Rubio and the administration. And that's why you're seeing President Trump in the meeting with Chancellor Merz yesterday tried to restate this and run away from the question that they are acting on behest of Israel. Marco Rubio has done the same today, but it's too late because there's clear evidence of the interview, not artificial intelligence. It was a live interview by the mainstream media where he said this. And so it has created a problem. Congress, they had a briefing with Congress yesterday too. And Congress was up in arms. If you look at lawmakers in terms of the purpose of the war, what is the intention? They've moved from one point to the other. And Congress is trying to reassert its authority in terms of the declaration of war. That is what is creating a problem within the administration. I think they've lost the strategic initiative for communication. It's gone from the White House.
So when you then are looking at what is currently taking place in the Gulf, for example, it's shocked the Gulf to its core. And one wonders, because there's been different schools of thought here, to say what kind of Gulf emerges following this war, and what does it mean for the way forward?
You know, Bongiwe, it raises serious problem in terms of the reliability of the American military presence in the Gulf, because the Americans are in the Gulf ostensibly to protect the Gulf states. But when Iran retaliated on Saturday morning, the Americans were nowhere to be seen. They took all their assets to go and protect Israel, and it raised serious concerns amongst the Gulf states. So the reliability of the Americans will be questioned moving forward. I just don't know if the Gulf states are going to arm themselves. Some of the states are very small states with very small population. So there's a need for a very better security architecture for the Middle East, not only for the Gulf, for the Middle East to come out of this thing. And I think moving forward, there should be a strategic discussion around this security architecture that will provide better guarantees for everyone around the region.
So what does it mean then? Because you're listening to, for example, a Pete Hegseth this afternoon, who says that the U.S. can go as far as it can, and he doesn't believe that Iran, in fact, can, outdo the United States. These are sentiments that the U.S. president has also said as well. So in light of all of this, with what you've just described, even for the Gulf countries and the countries in the Middle East, what happens then?
You know, Bongiwe, that statement that the U.S. can go on as long as the president wants, it's really to try to manage the damage that has emanated, because there are views within the Pentagon that the United States would not have all necessary defense equipment beyond 4 weeks. That's what they are saying. If this conflict goes on beyond 4 weeks, the U.S. would not have that. So they are trying to spin this in to say the U.S. would have the capacity to go on beyond the 4 weeks. But the other thing is that, Bongiwe, the United States does not have, or President Trump does not have political time. And what do I mean by political time? The midterm election is coming up. So this question of war and the unintended consequences of this war, for instance, the inflation, the gas prices, is going to be a big problem. There's no president in the U.S. who has won election, having gone to war, and with a very high inflation and really hard-hitting economy. So the Republicans now, they are likely to ditch him because this is his last term. What they are likely to do, they are going to look into their interests when the midterm election comes. And Trump is aware that he may be impeached for unleashing this war without approval of Congress. So there are a lot of issues at play here that the Americans are quite careful not to have a lot of casualties coming back, serious economy hitting, the oil prices and so on. So they are trying to manage these issues.
And speaking about managing issues, the consequences are already extending far beyond the Middle East. And we're seeing various leaders responding to the developments. For example, countries like the United Kingdom are trying so hard to stay out of it and seemingly play it safe. But is this possible?
Bongiwe, the biggest problem that particularly Western Europe are facing is the shortage of gas. Now that Qatar has shut down its gas production, and Qatar provides about 50% of European gas, it's going to hit them very hard. That's why you've seen an article in some major newspapers in Western Europe suggesting that, they have to go back to the Russian gas. President Putin this afternoon actually said that they would have to rethink whether they would keep on supplying Europe with gas. So there will be a serious shortage of gas. A lot of factories in Europe may shut down if this carry on. It will be compounded by the absence of cheap oil, because 20% of oil that goes around the world, it goes through the Strait of Hormuz. If the Houthis shut down Bab al-Mandab, another 20% of oil that goes through the Strait of Bab al-Mandab. So you'd have serious economic challenges. This country, we squandered our reserve. When we sold the reserve through some corruption shenanigans a few years ago, the Americans have strategic reserve, and the discussion now is whether should they start tapping on their strategic reserve to really try to mitigate the challenges. But that won't be a long-term thing. It's a very short-term stopgap that they have to think about it. The more the war goes, the more it creates serious problems. And more so, this war, if you look at the national security strategy, Bongiwe, the question of the Middle East was not part of the core strategic theater for the US. So it's just a big problem with the lawmakers now.
It sounds like inevitable consequences that we're likely to see. And the Strait of Hormuz, for example, with, the limbo that is currently taking place there. And one wonders, how does South Africa begin to view all of these developments? Because ultimately, we also may need to have our own strategies in place.
I think we need to go back to the drawing board. It's good South Africa has diversified purchasing of oil using Nigeria, but we still get a large portion of our oil from the Middle East. So we're going to have a serious problem. The prices of petrol next month is going to be unacceptable because, Brent crude this afternoon was trading at about $87 per barrel. And last week, before the war, it was about $67. So the conventional wisdom, Bongiwe, is that if the price of oil goes to $200 per barrel, you are likely to see a serious global recession, serious economic problems. Countries like South Africa without strategic reserve would have to shut down some of our mobility. Even factories would have to shut down because it can't operate without this oil.
I can't help but think about the EU currently then. How much of a difficult position is it in? And especially because how does it begin to confront Washington, if it can, or begin to even speak in a united voice regarding what is currently taking place if some of the members have already expressed themselves in the ways that they have?
You are unlikely to see cohesion within the EU. I like how Zelensky categorized the EU during the Munich security, that the EU is a group, a kaleidoscope of middle powers that are really confused, trying to persuade the United States. They're unlikely to do that. If you look at the discussion that Metz had yesterday at the White House, he did not come very strong in terms of really speaking about the consequences of this war on the European economy, because the German economy currently is in serious problem. The Q, and Trump was quite proud to say that the Q now moves to Beijing. But Beijing gets about 45% of its oil from, they take 45% of Iranian oil. So Beijing is likely to have serious problem too. So this is a global catastrophe. I've seen reports that countries like Singapore are starting to feel the pinch now. But if this conflict continues for the next few weeks, it would have serious consequences, not only on the global economy, even on peace and security around the world. So the question of energy security will be accentuated, and countries like South Africa would suffer most.
And of course, again, the UN Security Council in sharp focus on what it can and cannot do and how different the voices there are as far as what is currently taking place is concerned. So thank you so much, Doc, for your time. Appreciate it as always. Dr. Kingsley Makhubela, the international relations expert and former ambassador.